Now that we've talked about combining like terms, let's move on to the distributive property. And so I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to work through the examples, and then after we talk about the examples, I'm going to go through and do a summary. And as I'm working this through, you should be writing things down. Okay, distributive property, if we look at this definition, distributive property means multiplication that distributes over addition or subtraction. So that means we're going to multiply with adding and subtracting on the inside of the parentheses. So I'm going to take a negative 5, I'm going to multiply it times my 2x, and I'm also going to multiply it by a negative 6. So negative 5 times 2x is a negative 10x. Negative 5 times negative 6 is a positive 30. And again, if you need a calculator for that, that is totally fine. Next problem. This first one had two things inside the parentheses, 2 terms. This one has 3 terms inside the parentheses. That's okay. We can multiply all 3 of them. So I'm going to multiply the 6 times each of those 3. So 6 times 4x is 24x. 6 times 2 is 12. And 6 times 3y, and it's a negative, is minus 18y. And the last thing I probably should do is go back to that standard form. That's a minus sign. It was kind of ugly, but that's a minus sign. When I put it in standard form, I need to have an alphabetical order with my number at the end. So I'm going to rearrange this, and I'm going to put my 24x. The minus stays on the 18. Does not go with the 12, it goes with the 18. And then my 12 has the plus, and it goes at the very end. So that's my final answer here. Okay, next problem. The difference here is we have a 2 is on the right-hand side. That's okay. It still means distribution, and we can still do that. So 3x times 2 is 6x, and a negative 8 times 2 is a negative 16. Don't forget that minus sign. Number 10, the thing that's different on number 10 is there's this 6x that's like outside all by itself. You need to keep it outside, okay? This parentheses means you're going to take this 2 and multiply it by those 2 items, but not by this one, okay? So we're going to get an 8x minus 10x plus 6x. We don't change that 6x at all. But now we have like terms. And if we went back and look at our instructions, use distributive property and then combine like terms. So we do have to combine those now. So I have to finish. This is not a complete answer yet. To finish my answer, I have to add 8x plus 6x, and that becomes a 14x. The minus stays on the 10, and it goes there. Okay, once again, like I said, and now that I've worked out the problems, I want to go through and summarize this. So if you need to pause the video here and write this stuff down, you can. First most important thing with distributive property is that what we are looking for, we're looking for a number outside the parentheses with adding and subtracting inside the parentheses. And each of these 4 cases all have that going on. There's a number outside, adding and subtracting inside. There's a number outside, adding and subtracting inside. Another thing is always pay attention to negative signs. That's going to confuse us. But also that minus sign goes with the number after it. So that minus goes with the 3. And this minus goes with the 6. And a negative 6 times a negative 5 is a positive 30. Finally, make sure you're distributing to all the inside terms, but not the outside terms. So for instance, on number 8, we had to do all 3 of them. But for number 10, that 6, we do not distribute to that 6. Okay, that's some practice on distributive property. We'll have some more practice when we meet in our Zoom or whatever we have. Let's move on to the next section. And the next section is on evaluating a couple of vocab terms that we need to use, and maybe another one that I've used that I haven't mentioned yet. But an expression is a mathematical phrase with numbers, variables, and operations. So for instance, 5x plus 3, that is an expression. Another thing that I have mentioned, but you may or may not have known what it is a term. So a term is one of these, like 5x is a term, 3 is a term. Up here on number 10, 6x is a term, 5 is a term, etc. So any little piece of it, that's called a term. Okay, expression, here we go. Evaluating is when you plug in. You substitute known values into an expression and you simplify it. Make sure you use parentheses. That is super important. And the reason that's so important is negative signs. If you don't do it with the negative signs might throw you off. So let's go ahead and jump into some examples and see what we're going to do here. Okay, I had written that down here. If you have it here, wherever you want to write that down is okay, but make sure you use parentheses. So number 11, I'm going to plug in, that says evaluate. Evaluate means plug in. I'm going to plug in 2 into the x's. Anywhere I see an x, I have to put in a 2, and I want to do that with parentheses because if I don't do it with parentheses, I might get my signs mixed up. Now, if you have the kind of calculator like the TI-30SX or whatever it's called, you can probably put this in all at once. So if you have that kind, go ahead and put it all in at once. It'll give you the answer. That's the way you'll make the least mistakes. If you don't have that kind of calculator, then you have to follow PEMDAS. So I ran out of room, so I was coming up here for PEMDAS. Remember PEMDAS, the way we memorize that, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. And with PEMDAS, this is the order that we do things in. So this looks like it has a lot of stuff going on. It does. We don't do anything in parentheses first. Well, there's nothing inside. There's just one number. Can't do anything to it. Exponents, no exponents. Then multiplying or dividing. They're on the same level, multiplying and dividing. After that, we do adding and subtracting, again, on the same level. So I'm going to take 5 times 2, that's 10. And 3 times 2 is 6. I have a minus sign in between. My final answer is 4. Okay, that is how we evaluate. This next one is a little bit different because it has a fraction. That's okay. Let me tell you a little bit about fraction. First of all, we're going to plug that 8 in for the y. I'm going to do it in parentheses so I don't mess it up. So I'm going to plug in that 8. Again, if you have a calculator that can do this all at once, go ahead and do it all at once. That's fine. If you don't, though, you have to follow PEMDAS. And this is interesting. Parentheses, some people don't like the word PEMDAS because of this problem right here. Parentheses really means grouping symbols, and this big long fraction bar is kind of like this goes together in parentheses and this goes in its own set. We don't have to draw those parentheses, we just kind of understand it. But that's where that comes in. So in this case, we do what's in parentheses first. Well, 8 plus 4, that's in parentheses. Technically, they're not showing up in the original problem, but technically they are in parentheses. Then we take that and divide by 3. Remember, fraction bar means divide. So this is going to be 4 as my answer. Okay, last problem, evaluate. When x equals -3 and y equals 1, we have to plug in every time any letter that there is. So in other words, x is -3, I have to plug in a -3 in for that x. On to my next term, I have an 8. It doesn't have anything with it, so I'm just going to keep it as a regular old 8. And then I have a 2. My 2 needs a y, and that's a 1. So I'm going to take out the y, I'm going to put in the 1. Once again, if you have the kind of calculator where you can put all this in at once, do that. Makes fewer mistakes. If you don't, we have to do it separately. That's okay. PEMDAS says do multiplying, so we're going to take this and add a -12. That's a negative. And then we have a minus sign. I'm going to erase that little dot. Then we have a minus sign. We're going to go -8, and then plus 2 times 1, well, that's just 2. Once again, if you have a calculator, you can put all that in together, that's fine. If you're doing it in your head like me, you might combine these, and then you get a -20, and then you get -18. So the answer here is -18. Okay, so a couple things before we leave the video. Make sure that you write down any questions you have. If we've been going through this and you're kind of confused on how I did something, write it down. I think the best thing to do is maybe get a highlighter and write down your question. Why did you do this? And then get your highlighter out and highlight it so that when we come to our group time, whether it's in Zoom or in person or wherever we're doing, that you can ask that question. So make sure you write down questions. Any one of these sections, write down a question, highlight it, circle it, something so that you know to ask that question later, and I will answer it. Another thing is, next time we meet, whether that's on the video call or whatever it is, we will do some warm-up problems. We'll do some practice problems of this. So Yes, you do have an assignment, but you also will do some practice together. So if you're not feeling comfortable yet, you will get comfortable soon. We'll do some practice together. Okay, that's it. Make sure you keep this page. Don't lose this because it has everything you need in it, and we'll use it when we get to our practice problems.